Have fun.
Hello, Jacksonites, and welcome back to still, I guess you could call them March of the Monsters. Um, oh boy, this will be fun. Today, I will be reviewing a very strange film, and it's somewhat well known in the kaiju fan base. But it's also pretty obscure, and I definitely at times think that's for the better, and at times no. I just think that's for the better sometimes. Today I will be talking about 1967's The X from Outer Space.
Did you see I was going like this?
Yeah, I could see it in the camera.
Put him back.
No, Greenie stays there.
Okay, fine. There.
Well, we both know.
There we go.
So indeed, The X from Outer Space. Yeah, there we go. The X from Outer Space, released in 1967 by Shochiku Studios. Now, I don't know that much about the production of The X from Outer Space. You're fine. You're not even on camera. I don't know that much about the production of The X from Outer Space, but I do know this. In 1967, Shochiku, which is one of 4 of Japan's big film studios, them being Shochiku, Toho, of course, Toei, the company that produces Kamen Rider and Super Sentai, and at the time it was Dai, which has now become Kadokawa. Shochiku, for some reason, needed some quick and fast money. For a reason that I do not know exactly why. I don't think they were in any financial issues like Dai. I just think that they wanted to get some quick and easy money because Shochiku is mainly known for samurai films, political films, and melodramas. Like they put out some of Akira Kurosawa's films. They put out some of what's his name, Masaki Kobayashi's films, uh, and even Yoshijiro Ozu, who are all pretty famous Japanese film directors. But for some reason, Shochiku needed some money, and they saw the horror genre and the kaiju genre as means of making quick money. And quite frankly, yes, that is very true because kaiju movies and horror movies are very easy to make, and they don't cost all that much money. So between 1967 and 1968, Shochiku made 4 movies. There's The X from Outer Space, which was the first one to be made and the first to be released. And for what I've seen, it was the most successful film out of these 4. Gok Body Snatcher from Hell. The Living Skeleton, which is the only one of the 4 to be released in black and white. I'm guessing that's because they had the lowest budget of the 4. And then there was also Genocide War of the Insects, which is a fucking ridiculous movie. Well, all these movies are pretty fucking ridiculous, but Genocide War of the Insects is a pretty absurd film. But The X from Outer Space was the only one to be released in 1967, and also ironically, it was released the same year that every major film studio in Japan released a monster movie. Toho released Son of Godzilla and King Kong Escapes. Dai released Gamera vs. Gauss. Nikatsu put out Gap of the Triphibian Monster. Shochiku put out The X from Outer Space. Also, the original Yongari, Monster from the Deep, was released as well. Aside from that, though, I know nothing else about the production of The X from Outer Space, other than... Actually, hang on. In the original script, Early drafts for the film featured gigantic monstrous plants as the antagonist before the monster Gilala was created to replace these abandoned creatures, which I think is kind of is kind of a shame because I've always liked the idea of giant man-eating plants, but that's just me. So The X from Outer Space is an interesting film in the kaiju fan base. Because I will never ever legitimately call The X from Outer Space a good movie. There are those like Adam Noyes who absolutely love the movie despite its flaws, and they say it's one of their favorite all-time favorite bad movies of all time. And then there are people like my girlfriend actually who say it's the second worst movie that she has ever seen in her entire life.
It is.
And for those who are wondering, she says the first worst horror movie, or not horror movie, but first worst movie she ever saw was Buried Alive or Buried, by Ryan Reynolds. Film where he's buried alive and has to try to find a way to get out, but he ends up dying in the end.
Fucking terrible movie.
So its reputation is certainly very divisive amongst kaiju fans. So where does my opinion on the film start out with? Well, it's bad. It's a bad movie. I will wholeheartedly admit, yes, The X from Outer Space is a terrible movie. It's a fucking bizarre movie. But I will also say that I do think The X from Outer Space is an enjoyably bad movie. Will I pick this over King Kong Escapes as an enjoyably bad movie? Hell no. I'll take King Kong Escapes any day over this film. But if King Kong Escapes was not available to me, I certainly would sit down to watch The X from Outer Space with some friends and watch a bad movie. So the plot to The X from Outer Space is really not that deep. The spaceship known as AAB Gamma is dispatched from Japan to land on Mars and investigate reports of a series of reports of UFOs in the area. And when the AAB Gamma nears Mars, it finds a mysterious UFO that begins to coat the AAB Gamma with these unusual spores. One of these spores is taken back to Earth. However, when it's exposed to radiation, it begins to develop. The spore grows into a giant lizard/chicken-like alien monster called the Gilala that begins a rampage across Tokyo. It is able to spit fireballs, it feeds on nuclear fuel, and it turns into a giant energy orb when it wants to fly around and destroys airplanes and tanks in Tokyo across its rampage. And that's pretty much the plot. It's not very deep. The second half of the movie is literally intercut with the humans reacting to Gilala's rampage and then Gilala continuing his rampage. Rinse, lather, and repeat. The military will try to stop Gilala, but nothing seems to work. However, Gilala is finally defeated by the main scientist characters of the film, creating a fictional substance known as Gilalalanium. Such a dumb fucking name. Such a dumb ass motherfucking name. Yeah. So Gilala is defeated by Gilalalanium by jets dropping bombs and coating Gilala in this substance, and it causes him to shrink back down to his spore size. They contain the spore and they launch the spore back into space where it will supposedly circle the sun in an endless orbit. That really is hang on. I really wish I could give you a longer plot synopsis, but that really is all that all that there is. The plot is that simple. So this review might be a little shorter than is expected. So I'm just gonna jump right into the pros and cons of the film. So, pro number one is that the film does have very good production. Well, not very good, but it has somewhat decent production values. There's a lot. This film clearly takes place in what is a supposedly much more futuristic time of humanity. Space travel is much more convenient and easy. There is a large base that is established, presumably on Mars, but also on the moon. And they've managed to create synthetic water on the moon base, which I'm pretty sure is impossible. They're able to grow stuff on the surface of the moon, but the apples are giant. The apples that they create, for example, are giant, like they're like this big, but they have no taste. This time period is clearly much more technologically advanced. It does remind me of a film that I have not seen. Well, I've seen parts of it. The Green Slime, which ironically came out the next year. So maybe the executives at Toei saw the X from outer space and said, we can do better than that. And actually, from what I've seen, Green Slime is better than this. But the production values are clearly not terrible. The sets are well made. They're very imaginative. They look like something right out of a Showa Godzilla movie or one of the early Showa Ultraman shows. There's lots of flashing lights, lots of see-through glass painted on maps, lots of people at computer desks and phones speaking in technobabble and such. It does feel straight out of a Showa era Godzilla movie, and it is somewhat fun to watch, and it is very imaginative. Also, the sets made for the moon base look pretty decent. Though they look a little reminiscent of the stuff used in Battle in Outer Space. Not that I'm thinking that they ripped off Battle in Outer Space to do these sets, but still, they just do look kind of similar. I'll talk about the special effects a little later, but overall, the production values for the various bases and inside the spaceship, that looks fine too. They're well constructed. They look fairly decent, and they're decently shot too. So I will give the film that. Pro number two is the special effects. They're decent. I would not say that they're amazing. I'll never say they're amazing. They're just decent. Specifically with when Gilala is on his rampage. The miniature sets are well made. They're well detailed. Everything that's shot at night or that's done at night looks really, really, really good. The miniatures look a lot more convincing. The various mountain sets that are made when since Gilala is born at the base of Mount Fuji, the mountain set made for Mount Fuji looks really good. It's well detailed. There's lots of little trees going all over the place. The smoke and the fire and the bright lights make it look really good. When Gilala is born and he takes a shit. A hot explosive radioactive shit.
Jesus.
Because that's literally what it looks like. Gilala explodes out of a hole at the base of Mount Fuji. He starts roaring to the sky and waving his arms about. There's red lights flashing behind him, and there's smoke and explosions billowing all over the place. And then there's this fluid that starts to spill all over the mountainside, and it starts to corrode and melt everything around. And by morning, it's still bubbling because Gilala is born at night. And it literally looks like Gilala, when he was born, the first thing he did was take a massive shit all over the Mount Fuji landscape. It was brown. Yes. It was hilarious. The first time that I saw this movie, I started screaming with laughter because it literally looked like Gilala took a giant dump. But aside from that, that scene looked great. All the mountainous regions that are made when Gilala's going on his rampage, those look really good. All the sets for the cities in Tokyo and the AAB Gamma base at the FAFC, that's what's called, which is pretty much a futuristic version of NASA. That looks fine. The wireworks for the jets in the film are actually quite good. You never see the strings when the jets are flying around and shooting their missiles. Well, when they're shooting their missiles, it looks kind of lackluster. And also when the ground-based military units are shooting missiles, it's kind of lazy because there's some shots where there's a shot where there's a missile and then it just does a jump cut and the missile is gone. It's pretty sloppily edited. But the wireworks for the jets when they're flying around, there's some shots where the jets are clearly in the same shot as Gilala and they're flying by. You never see the strings. There's one scene that was pretty laughable where there was one jet that flew in and like bumped into Gilala's face, and then just kind of stood there for a minute. Then Gilala swatted it away, and when it exploded, it clearly broke something on the side of Gilala's face. But I'll let that slide because the rest of the wire work is so good. And also the miniature sets are well made, though it's very obvious that they're miniatures when Gilala destroys them, especially during the day. A lot of Gilala's rampage takes place during the day, and while I would say that's an ambitious thing because it kind of takes a page out of Rodin's book, I would also say in this case it's also kind of a problem because Gilala isn't shot like a giant monster, or he is, but the film isn't like shot from low angles to make Gilala appear huge. He's just shot straight on. So unless you really turn your brain off, you don't really get the sense of the illusion that Gilala is a giant monster. You feel like you're watching test footage of a guy in a ridiculous rubber lizard chicken monster suit going around destroying a miniature set. Like I never get the illusion that is a giant monster bumbling around destroying tanks with a spit fireball. But still, the special effects are somewhat decent for this film. They're nowhere near as something as good. They're nowhere near as good as something like Son of Godzilla or King Kong Escapes or hell, even Gamera versus Gauss. But they certainly are better than the Gap of the Triphibian Monster. Believe it or not, that movie is worse than this. They also are better, in my opinion, than the effects done in Yongari Monster from the Deep. So the special effects are good, but like Adam Noyes said, they're very clunky, and it's very clear that the special effects team was kind of new at doing this kind of thing. Pro number 3 is Gilala himself. Now, Gilala as a monster. I will say that his design, Gilala is one of the most ridiculous monsters I have ever seen in my entire life. He looks like something that is straight out of the Ultraman franchise. And the Ultraman franchise is both famous and infamous for having incredibly ridiculous looking monsters. But Gilala is truly, I would definitely say he's one of the top 10 most ridiculous looking monsters I have ever seen in my entire life. In general, Gilala resembles a large bird-like monster with a bulky, muscular upper body and strange antennae that come out of the top of his head. And his head is silver with not really. I think his entire body is a dark greenish gray. But he has pink, sometimes red eyes. The tips of his antennae are bright gold. And Gilala has a series of horns on the back of his head which curve upwards. And his forehead has a weird-looking periscope kind of reminds me of periscope. Kind of reminds me of an anglerfish a little bit. Appendage rising up his forehead, which could be a vestigial like third eye. Gilala has large reptilian feet as well and well-developed claws. And on the front of each of his thighs and the top of his arms, he has wave-like ridges which run vertically towards his wrists and his shins. He also has a long tail, which has vaguely crocodilian-esque scales going up his spine, as well as a kind of a slightly Godzilla-looking dorsal fin going up his back. He also has a claw on the end of his tail, which nobody ever uses. Or which the monster doesn't use, excuse me. So Gilala is a fucking ridiculous ass looking monster, but you know what? It's because that he looks so ridiculous that everybody remembers him for it. So definitely kudos for that. You never ever see another monster like Gilala in kaiju history. That is for goddamn sure. And he is a fun monster to watch. And this leads me into pro number 4. This movie does have some pretty fun monster action. Like I said, the second half of the film is just Gilala's rampage. He destroys Tokyo he destroys Tokyo. He destroys Ginza in Shinjuku. He destroys a few dams and a few factories in the mountainous terrain. He destroys the AAB Gamma base. He goes on a rampage, and it is very fun to watch. It does get a little repetitive after a little while, though, because of one big problem, but also because of another problem where every time Gilala will be rampaging for a few minutes, then it'll cut to the humans trying to figure out how to kill him, and then it'll cut to Gilala's rampage once again. After a few minutes, it'll cut back to the humans for a few minutes, rinse, lather, repeat. I think that happens at least 10 times in the second half of the film, and it does get a little repetitive towards the end. But still, the monster action is very fun. Watching Gilala fight the military is pretty entertaining. There's tanks that go up against him, which do absolutely nothing. There's a shit ton of jets that go around shooting their missiles at him, which do absolutely nothing. Gilala just takes them all out with his hands and his various fireballs that he spits out of his mouth. He destroys various buildings in order to find nuclear resources to feed on. Overall, the monster action in this film is but it is entertaining, and it's definitely the best part of the film without a complete shadow of a doubt. And that's all that she wrote for pros for this movie. So now we're gonna get into the cons. Oh boy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Un momento. Oh, nothing important. I have 8 cons for the X from Outer Space. Con number 1. This is one of my biggest problems. The music score in this movie is awful. Absolutely awful. The music was done by Taku Izumi, whom, let's see. Hang on, let me see if I can look him up. Nope, there ain't. Never mind. So Taku Izumi does the music for this film, who I have only seen this film that he's done music for. And the music is awful. It is fucking atrocious. It's one of the worst examples of a film that has a soundtrack that does not fit whatsoever. The opening song to this film is atrocious. Chiku Namomashin Hoktachi da 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 Chiku. Oh my god, it's terrible. It is fucking terrible. It'll be stuck in your head throughout the entire film. The rest of the movie has just jazzy music score. This movie should have a more sci-fi-esque feel because the first 40 minutes of this movie is a space opera. So this movie should have a more sci-fi centric soundtrack, It doesn't. It sounds like a porn soundtrack almost. And this is my big problem with this movie's score. During Gilala's rampage, Gilala shows up at 47 minutes into the movie. For the rest of the film, all the music that I remember until the end song is the same two notes. Dun, 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 dun. That piece of music is repeated throughout the rest of the movie almost constantly. It is so aggravating to listen to. It is one of the most annoying pieces of music I have ever heard in my entire life. And it literally plays almost constantly in the second half of the film. This is one of the worst music scores that I have ever heard, not just for a monster movie. In fact, I would almost say it probably is the worst music score that I have ever heard for a monster movie. But I would say this is one of the worst music scores that I have ever heard in my entire life from any movie, kaiju movie or not. Oh my God, is this movie's music terrible. Con number 2. This is the worst aspect of the special effects. The blue screen effects are atrocious. There's quite a few of them too. There's only one blue screen shot, or actually no, it was a blue screen shot. It was a composite shot. The composite shots look okay. There's one scene where there's people running in the foreground, and there's Gilala that shows up in the background. It's clearly a composite shot, but it doesn't look half bad. But it's the blue screen effects that just absolutely kill it for me. There's quite a few shots where Gilala is trying to flap his wings like a chicken in the background. There's people running around in the foreground, and it's clearly a blue screen effect because Gilala looks almost see-through. And there's also a lot of shots where Gilala's foot or his hands will reach down to either step on people or try to grab at something that he wants to eat. And it literally looks like a cardboard animated stop motion cutout done via blue screen effects. And it looks fucking atrocious. It looks worse than the blue screen effects in Yongari Monster from the Deep. And that's saying something because that movie has absolutely horrendous blue screen effects. Actually, I'd almost say these movies are tied with how bad the blue screen effects are. So yeah, the blue screen effects are absolutely horrendous. Con number 3, there's lots of filler in this film. If you were to cut out the filler, I think this movie would be less than an hour long. If you wanted to make this as like a 1 hour TV special for a monster film, that would have been much better. Like you could have made this into like an hour long anthology monster movie show. Like this could have easily been an episode of Ultra Q. But there's lots of filler. In the first half of the movie, when the AB Gamma is forced to land at the moon base because one of the characters on the film gets space sickness, there's about a 15-minute portion of the film where the characters are literally just doing jack diddly squat for the plot, and they're just doing random shit on the moon base. Spacewalking, showering, eating apples where they explain they are huge, but they have no taste. And then there's also a love triangle in this movie. This leads me into con number... Well, no, I'll talk about that in just a second. But yeah, there is lots of filler. And like I said, you easily could snip out a half hour's worth of filler in this film. This movie's an hour and 28 minutes. And you could easily snip out a third of this movie. And all that would be filler. Actually, I think the movie would have been much better if you snipped out all the filler. Yes, it'd be just about an hour long, but it'd still be a better film. This leads me into the next issue, is that all the characters are boring. Every single human character is absolutely boring. We have Eiji Okada as Dr. Kato. He's just a standard generic scientist that knows everything. We have Shunya Wazaki as Captain Sano. He's just a boring, no nonsense, know everything, badass captain. We have Itoko Harada as Michiko, who is the second part of the love triangle in this film. Oh, God. And she's just a damsel in distress, and she's so boring. We have Peggy Neal as Lisa, who is a somewhat known actress at the time. She's kind of the main character in the film. She's the one who figures out how to kill Gilala. She's the one who gets with Captain Sano at the end. And she's obviously the third part of the love triangle of the film. And then the rest of the cast is just utterly terrible. They're all boring as all living fuck. Hang on. Hiroshi Fujioka is in this movie, aka the original Kamen Rider. Interesting. But yeah, the rest of the cast is just utterly terrible. They're all boring. They're just bland, boring, basic sci-fi / kaiju movie cast. They're just there to give exposition, look all mopey and dopey and grumpy while the monster is rampaging, and they're just there to give exposition, scientific technobabble, and just talk about, oh, we're so doomed because the monster will destroy us all bullshit. Oh God, this is one of the worst casts in any monster movie I've ever seen in my entire life. I've said that a lot in the last few months, but this movie truly has a terrible cast. Every character is boring, bland, has no personality, and is uninteresting as all living shit. And this leads me into 1, 2, 3, 5. Con number 5 is the love triangle in this movie is so fucking forced. Why do we need to have a love triangle plot aspect in this movie? It goes nowhere. It adds nothing to the plot. It just makes the movie that much more insufferable to sit through in the first half of this film. And it doesn't make the characters any more interesting. I just, in general, do not like love triangles. I think love triangles are an incredibly... It's one of those ideas that you so rarely ever get it done right. It's somewhat well done in the original Godzilla, but then again, I don't like Emiko, so I can't really exactly say that it works there completely. But the love triangle aspect just did not need to be here whatsoever. And I just thought it was utter crap, completely forced, and just did not need to be there. Con number 6 is this. I don't really talk about this very much when I talk about monster movies, but holy shit, does this movie have a terrible dub. This is one of the top 10 worst English dubs I have ever heard for a Japanese product. It's worse than the English dub for the original Ultraman show. And I think that one has a pretty horrendous dub. The English actors, they're incredibly monotone. They sound incredibly bored. They give absolutely zero effort in any of their performances whatsoever. This is hands down one of the worst English dubs I've ever heard in my entire life. I almost have no words. It is that bad. It is cringe worthy as fuck to listen to. You almost get ear cancer just by listening to it. It is that bad. Con number 7 is that this movie is horrendously paced. This has to do with another con, which I'll talk about in a minute. But this movie is so horrendously paced. The first 2/3 of the film move along at a snail's pace. Actually, no, yeah. The first half of this movie, moves along at a snail's pace. And then the second half of the movie, which is the better half of the film, moves along at a very brisk pace. That's just because we're watching Gilala destroy shit. At least something is happening. The first half of the movie is so slow. It doesn't help that because the characters are so boring. The characters suck. The characters suck. this movie is so poorly paced. There's lots of filler moments in this movie where you're so bored you almost want to turn the movie off. I can count at least 3 times where I almost wanted to turn the movie off watching the movie the first time. So this movie is horrendously paced. I would also say it's one of the top 10 most horrendously paced monster movies I've ever seen. Now, the last problem that I have, con number 8. I've been talking a lot about the fact that this, like the first half of this movie and the second half of this movie. That's because this is one of the biggest examples of a monster movie that has Sinister 2 syndrome I have ever seen in my entire life. Adam Noyes said this in his My Thoughts on the X from Outer Space video. This movie feels like 2 different movies colliding, or that were collided together to make one movie. There you go. Like you had 2 44-minute long short films, and you sewed them together, and there's your movie. The first half of this movie feels like a space opera wannabe, and the second half is a wannabe Godzilla ripoff. Now, granted, as a Godzilla ripoff, I don't think this movie is that bad, because it certainly is very original. It doesn't feel like it's derivative of the original Godzilla whatsoever. But oh my God, does this movie stink of Sinister 2 syndrome. It's one of the worst cases of Sinister 2 syndrome I have ever seen in my entire life. It literally does feel like 2 entirely different movies that were Frankenstein-style stitched together to make an hour and a half long feature. The first half of the movie is crap. The second half is hot garbage as far as I'm concerned. It's bad, but it's enjoyably stupid bad. So, that was a mouthful. That's all I have to say about the X from Outer Space, guys. Do I recommend the X from Outer Space? Well, I do recommend you get this collection pack from Criterion. It does include all 4 films from Shochiku that were released during that time. So if you're curious, I definitely do recommend this. This cost me about $28. So I recommend that. But do I recommend the X from Outer Space itself? Believe it or not, actually, yes. 2 ways. 1, as a curiosity piece. But also 2, if you and some friends want to get together and get fucking shit-faced and watch a bad monster movie, the X from Outer Space is excellent cannon fodder for that. I'd actually say it's one of the top 5 best monster movies to get drunk watching with a group of friends. So, yeah, I recommend the X from Outer Space from that. But if you try to watch this movie with a serious mindset, you're going to hate this movie. Now, my rating for this film was really tough, but I'm deciding ultimately to give it a 6 out of 10. It's a terrible movie. However, it's an enjoyably terrible movie. And that's all I can say about it. Really. That's the best way that I could recommend this movie. It's a terrible bad movie. Or it's a terribly good movie. Excuse me. So that's all I had to say about the X from Outer Space. Post your comments down below and let me know what you think. Hit the like button and hit the subscribe button. Share this video with your friends. Look forward to the next episode where we review a movie that I technically have reviewed before, but those reviews no longer exist, and I've been wanting to get into this trilogy again since then, where I talk about 1966's Daimajin. So I hope you all see me that. I hope you all join me for that video. And as always, go out and if you're gonna make a monster movie, don't give it Sinister 2 syndrome, because that's just terrible. And I will see you guys in the next video.